Hello.
Good evening and welcome to the Eclectic Radical. I am Chris Richards, the Eclectic
Hi,
Radical, your host. And with me is my guest, Seven Colorful Birds.
hi,
Uh, and
everybody.
and go ahead and tell the folks watching about yourself, please, Seven.
Sure. I'd be happy to. I go by Seven. I've had a few different names over the years, but I'm a very big activist in local circles here in my community. But in addition to that, I was the firefighter EMT for about 12 years. And when I could no longer, due to post traumatic stress, and a heart issue associated with my work with the fire department, when I could no longer run calls, I began volunteering as a street medic in my community during 2020, during the George Floyd protests, and treated a lot of tear gas, a lot of pepper spray, and stuff like that. Done a lot of marching since then. I kind of decided with this last gun control march that I was going to take a little bit of a break for my mental health, but I'm very outspoken and very snarky. But I think there's a lot of people out there who tell you, just talking to me, I'm one of the nicest, fuzziest people you'll ever meet. But other than that, I just the root of all of my activism, in particular, is just the fact that I am a parent, I'm a mom, and it is very important to me for my daughter to have a, but also that she sees that I am trying to make the world better for her. And this is something very personal that I don't usually like broadcast everywhere, but I will tell everybody. I come from a family on the paternal side of my family. They're German, and so there was some complicity there in World War II with my family. And I didn't actually learn about that complicity until I got into high school and we were watching videos of the Holocaust. And I was horrified, just completely horrified. And right then, and I was in high school in 1998. And right then on the spot, I said, nope, it's not going to be me. I'm not going to let it happen. Cloud my conscience in the future, and especially now that I have a child, that's a big part of it. So that's where all my activism comes from. Um, I have since found out. I found out a couple years ago I am part Native. I'm Seminole and Choctaw. I'm not enrolled in any tribe. That's just a part of my identity that I'm very proud of, and I'm making a lot of friends in the Native community that way, and that's also something that I hold very close to my heart. Yeah, that's about it. That's where I'm at.
Well, I mean, and that's a good place. I have a stepson who's seen the wrong side of the criminal justice system, and while he's not perfect or blameless there, it's still the sort of thing where you see how they screw people over and you want to stop it. Everybody deserves to be treated like a human being,
Absolutely.
and they do not treat people like a human being in jail.
Nope. Nope.
Uh, and if you can't treat people like human beings, what you're going to get back when you let them go is not going to be a better human being for the experience. And
And that's the sad truth, sir.
our system makes things worse instead of better.
Yep. Yep. I completely agree. I saw a lot of during the George Floyd protest. I saw there was a kid here. He was in high school, and God bless him. I mean, I'm going 38 this year. 16 years old, was leading these protests here locally for the George Floyd. And he got arrested and was charged with a felony because he stepped off the curb during the protest in front of a police car. So they arrested this kid, charged him with a felony. He's 16 years old. And now he did get it waived, but it's going to be on his record regardless.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just thinking, and I just remember I was so outraged when I heard what was going on, because I said, you just potentially ruined this kid's life
Yeah.
you know, and it's just it starts in the schools and it just carries on down
Well,
the line.
that's why you hear people talking about cops in schools. They want
Yeah.
cops in schools so they can arrest kids in schools. No cop has ever stopped a school shooting.
You know, yeah, yeah. Well, I was just listening to John Oliver, and he was talking about a 5-year-old who got arrested and charged because he threw a carrot at another kid.
Yes.
And it's like, you know what? So, and the other, and since we'll kind of segue into current events here, but when you're talking about things like Uvalde and Parkland, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
fat lot of good having cops in the schools did there.
The cop ran from
Ran.
the shooting in Parkland, and Uvalde, they let the guy into the
They
school after
stood
stopping him
there.
outside. They stopped him outside and they're like, dude, what you doing? And the dude is like, I'm going to kill me some kids. And they let him in. I don't understand when if the cops really confronted him on the street, how did he get inside?
Well, and that's really what I'm saying. You know, I mean, it's like if you put these cops in schools, the first thing they're going to do, okay, and the data has showed this over and over again, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to target the minorities.
Of course.
And then, so now you've got this school to prison pipeline that is very real.
Yes.
And then, especially with the state of our economy, to me, it's an excuse for cheap labor.
Exactly. That's what it's been. But even more than that, you have to understand that the companies that run the prisons get paid because the prison's full. They
And
don't get paid for empty
obscene,
beds.
an obscene amount of money. And you
And
know what?
this is why you had Cash for Kids in Pennsylvania several years ago, because the group, the private for-profit corporation that ran their juvenile detention system was paying judges to send kids to prison.
And like I said, and mostly minority kids, and that goes back to the problem with the police too, because so many of them have been infiltrated by white supremacists.
Well, so I will stop there because I've said this before. This is a pet peeve of mine. We should not talk about the police being infiltrated by white supremacists. The cops are white supremacists.
Touché.
There is an old Vulcan proverb: cops and clan go hand in hand.
Yes, I completely agree. And you know what? And being in EMS for so long, like I said, I was in the firefighter medic for 12 years. Being in EMS as long as I was, the one thing I can confidently say, and I do try and drive this home on my Twitter a lot too, is there are significantly more bad cops than there ever will be good cops.
Well, and even a quote unquote good cop is still someone who is signed up to enforce the law, whether the law is good or bad.
Well, and the other thing too is it all gets back to that saying, okay, so you have 9 Nazi cops and 1 not Nazi cop, and they say anything. So how many Nazi cops do you have?
Well, and that's really the simple thing, because what happens to actual good cops who try to inform on the bad cops? Well, they get shot or forced into retirement or both.
And the one thing I did see quite a bit was any of the cops, I would say, that voiced any objection to the system. It's exactly what you said. They were either forced into retirement, or I knew a lot of them that said, no, you know what, screw this, I'm out. And they went back to school for 6 months and to be an EMT and decided to be a paramedic instead.
Good for them. More people need to make that decision. Be a paramedic, folks, not a cop.
Yeah. Well, and you know, and something else too. The one thing I will I'll plug this while I'm here because I think it's so important for people to know. Okay, 70% of this country's firefighters and medics are volunteers.
Yep.
So they do not get paid to come and save your life. If your house is on fire, if you're having a heart attack, okay, we don't get paid for that. If you're lucky, Okay, you live in the city, like say New York. NYFD gets an obscene amount of money. But if you are in a rural department or maybe
Yeah.
not so big town or whatever, you might be lucky to get $5 reimbursed for gas, which I can
Yeah. I'm lucky.
tell you right now.
I'm lucky the area I live has professional firefighters, but just a
Yep.
little ways up the hill, there are volunteer firefighters.
Yep.
Where I lived in Tennessee, when I lived in Tennessee, the firefighters were volunteer firefighters.
Mm-hmm.
Even in a big town like Abingdon, Virginia, which was reasonably good size and not too far away, the fire department was volunteer.
Volunteer. Yep. Yep. And so when you do have those cops, I got into this to help people, not to be throwing kids in jail.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the cops that we're not going to hear about because they're not the ones that that the police departments are putting out in front and saying, look, these are the good
Exactly.
guys. Yeah. Unfortunately, yeah, and that's really sad.
Well, I mean, police whistleblowers get thrown out. I mean, Frank Serpico got shot in the face and forced into early medical retirement.
Mm-hmm.
There was a guy in Memphis who basically had his career ruined by a bunch of administrative complaints after he blew the whistle.
I've seen that happen a lot.
It's
A
just
lot. It'll be a trail of little things
yeah,
all the way out until they go, hey, maybe you should just leave. Don't make too much of a splash when you leave, and you might still get your pension.
yeah, that sort of thing.
Maybe.
Yeah. And of
So,
course, if you leave early, you don't get your full pension anyway.
mm-mm.
So if they're pushing you out early, you're not getting your 20-year money.
Nope. Nope. And even me, I wasn't getting paid when I worked at the fire department.
Sure.
I was supplementing with work as a pharmacy technician, and that entire time, I still got I had a pension, what they call IPERS here in Iowa, and when my doctor said nope, you can't do it anymore, enough is enough, I lost my whole pension.
Yeah. See, and that's how it works if you don't have your time in for the way that however the system defines it and requires it.
Well, and the one thing that people say is, oh, well, EMS people, they get a tax credit, it's okay. And just to demonstrate, at least here, I don't know how it is elsewhere in the country, but here in Iowa, I want to say in 2012 or 2013, there was a proposal before the Iowa Senate that all EMS, to kind of just compensate and say thank you from the state, would get $1,000 tax credit on their taxes. We were
Sure.
all very excited about that because obviously that's $1,000 in 2012. That helps a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
And the Republicans said no, we didn't need it. They whittled it down to $50.
Of course they did.
So we get, as a thank you, we can claim this even if we're retired. If we're still even doing any volunteer work in EMS at all, we can still claim it. So, but I mean, that's how much they care about their first responders. So, but kind of to circle back, so to go from police work to first responder work is a very big shift, and you usually don't hear about that at all.
It makes sense.
So from where you're supposed to stop gunshots to where you're treating them.
Well, I mean, when have cops ever stopped gunshots?
Well, and you know what? I had a cop tell me one time. So in 2009, when I got out of EMT school, a dark time in my life, and I did have cops come to talk to me. And I told the cop I had just graduated from school for EMT. We had lost one of our crewmates in EMT class. He had committed suicide. And the cop said, do what you firefighter medics do. He said, I'd rather run away from bullets than run into a fire. And that's always stuck with me.
Yeah, well, there is
They are
that.
very good at running away from.
Well, I mean, again, they waited outside the school at Uvalde for hours while the guy was just in there killing people.
Well, and something that, especially as a mom, really concerns me. And I did actually, I had a very interesting conversation the other day with Chuck Grassley's aide. I called him and I said, look, here's what bothers me. I said, when you talk about all of these school shootings happening and we're not taking any real significant action on this, I said, first things first. About a month ago, there was a shooting at East High down the road. Okay, this was in the news.
Yeah.
Biden mentioned it. That was literally a mile from my house. In November of last year, my daughter's elementary school got shot up.
Wow.
Now, thankfully, none of the kids were there, but they had bullet holes in the side of the school. And I mean, just to kind of give you an idea, there's my daughter's school.
I see.
So it's right by my house. So we heard all of this. We saw all of this happen. So I got on and I said to Senator Grassley's aide, I said, look, this has gone way past all of your guys' partisan bullshit. This is happening in Chuck Grassley's backyard. And this is not something, all of this hype that you guys, they want to take away our guns and blah, blah, blah. No, man, I just don't want somebody going across the street and shooting up my daughter's school and shooting up our house at the same time.
And that's a fair concern. And let's keep in mind that this school shooting thing is not, I mean, it's not new anymore. But it's also not a phenomenon that's always been there throughout our history.
No, and it's one that I have watched very keenly over the years become progressively worse.
When I was a kid, there was a high school girl who was pissed at her teachers and who got up and went over to the elementary school down the street from where she lived and shot up a swing set and killed some kids.
Yeah.
That was when I was a kid. That was a big deal. That was national news.
Yep.
Because stuff like that was so rare.
And you've probably seen me mention it on my Twitter a lot, but I was a freshman in high school when Columbine happened.
Yeah.
And I remember it very similar to September 11th. All the teachers that day, that's all that they had on the screens, on the TV screens. And we were like, oh my God. And I remember it was me and one other friend with a sign. This was in 1999 saying, we need to keep these guns out of the hands of people with impulse control problems. I don't care what reason you have those problems. That's irrelevant. If you should not be able to just walk into a store, walk out with a military grade weapon.
It's true.
On credit.
It's true.
And we all really thought that Columbine was going to be the end of it.
Well, and that was the whole thing, is you started to see more stuff like Columbine, and it's gotten progressively worse until there are so many that unless a whole bunch of kids get killed, you don't even hear about them anymore.
Well, and that's really what bothers me the most is that, it's like Columbine, you thought, well, people are going to say it's high school kids are stupid, blah, 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 whatever excuse they would give. But when Sandy Hook got shot up and we didn't do anything for those precious angels, that's when, that is really, I think, when, before then, my involvement in politics, just in general, had been very kind of skimming the surface. After Sandy Hook is when it all changed for me, because then I was a parent, and at some point you say to yourself, look at, and especially EMS, I've seen it. I've seen what these kinds of weapons can do to bodies.
Yes.
Okay? And I mean, when you start talking about bullet cavitation and stuff, and you're picturing that in the body of your 7-year-old.
Well, what?
And all changes, and it closes in around you.
I bet.
And
I also remember that a certain aspect of the story has gotten lost since Columbine.
Mm-hmm.
It started out at Columbine. There was this suspicion that white supremacists were involved, and the kids had become radicalized Nazis online. And then all of a sudden, you heard, no, 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 that wasn't it. They were bullied, and it was these kids who were bullied lashing out, and it just sort of
And I can, and I was just going to say, and I can just say, from that being in high school at that period of time, it was common sense, and I'm from California. It was common sense that it was a white supremacy thing.
Yeah, no,
like everybody knew it.
Yeah, and I agree, and they haven't even talked about that even a little bit in later shootings, even when it's obvious that it's the same sort of thing, copying the same sort of stuff.
Some of them leave behind manifestos that specifically spell that out, but we never hear about it.
Exactly.
We never hear about it. And, you know, I tell my husband, I say, you know, white supremacy to me is a plague.
Well, school shootings are not, a lot of them are Nazi terrorism, and we never hear it spoken about that way. Instead, we hear about bullying and kids' mental health, and how did they not know that he was going off the rails?
You know what? And give me a break. I was bullied in middle school and high school, at least the first year. After that, it was a little different. But and I didn't go shooting anybody. And I have borderline personality disorder. I didn't shoot nobody because I was bullied. Give me a flipping break. And it's like this new gun control legislation. God bless him, but David Hogg is like, yay, it's progress and all of this other stuff. And I'm like, but if you look at the lettering of the bill, it's all mental health, mental health, mental health, mental health. And I'm just thinking to myself, it is not a mental health problem. It is an access to guns problem.
Well, and a Nazi problem. Let's not forget the Nazi problem.
Absolutely, and a Nazi problem.
If we stopped tolerating Nazis, less kids would be Nazis, and less Nazi kid and fewer Nazi kids would shoot up schools.
Well, and you know, you and I have had this conversation online before. Actually, after World War II, they just welcomed them into the United States practically with open arms.
Yes.
And there's a wonderful show on Amazon, and it's called, I want to say, Hunters, and it's about a group of Nazi hunters. And I remember there's a scene in there where it's like, come to America, we have apple pie, but everyone in it's like got that German accent. Come to America, we have the apple pie. And I just was thinking to myself, I was like, that is exactly how it is, though.
Well, in 1946, the British MI6 and G2, which is the U.S. Army Intelligence Corps, got the bright idea that they absolutely needed to save this former spy for Hitler named Reinhard Gehlen. And the reason they needed to save this guy Gehlen was because he knew more about the Soviet Union than anybody else, because it had been his job to spy on the Soviet Union for Hitler. And so they stole this guy Gehlen, and this guy Gehlen then rescued every other Nazi he could get his hands on to help him.
Yep. And even if you're talking about, and this is, again, I really don't like to touch on this too much, just because I've gotten some negative feedback about it in the past, but for the sake of transparency, I am going to say, on my paternal side of my family, which I want to be clear, I don't speak with them for a reason. I don't speak with them for a reason. But the paternal side of my family, even if you're not talking about big name Nazis, okay? A whole bunch of their children and grandchildren came over here to the United States, and I am here to tell you, from the time I was 6 or 7 years old, going to Christmas at my Oma's house, still doing the salute. So they're here. They are here, and they are embedded in America.
Well, one of Reagan's bundlers was a guy from what's now southwestern Russia, named Nikolai Nazarenko. And Nikolai Nazarenko was a chieftain from a Cossack band that had refused to knuckle under to the Soviets, and he expressed his rebellion by becoming a Nazi and teaming up with Hitler. And he in an interview with a journalist, no less.
American imperialism has a tendency to do that.
In an interview with a he was rescued by the Americans. I forgot to add that. Okay. He was rescued by the Americans.
Rescued.
He was
that
settled.
Rescued or rescued? Like,
well, let's be serious. He was seriously in danger, because whether you believe that it was justified or not, and I absolutely believe it was justified, you know that Stalin was going to kill his Nazi ass if he ever depends on it.
Yeah.
Not just because he was a Nazi, which was bad enough because they had invaded the Soviet Union and killed a bunch of people, but because he was specifically a Cossack who had been at war with the Soviet Union already and used the Nazi invasion as a chance to collaborate with the Nazi invader.
Yep. Yep.
So yeah, it was not good for him. We did rescue him, and that's really
so it's rescue, not
that's really the thing that makes me angry is we saved a lot of these Cossack and Belarusian and Ukrainian Nazis from Stalin, and we settled them in New York or Calgary, Alberta, or parts of South Africa, or parts of Argentina and Brazil, or wherever.
Yeah.
And all these places that we settled them, they put down roots.
Yeah.
And made more Nazis.
And again, it's the same. It's the same with just the Germans in general. Well, we'll wait a little bit, and then we'll just kind of trickle over there. And that's exactly what happened in my family. Is the daughter of a Nazi married an Air Force man, and then they moved to the United States. And so my paternal father, he has dual citizenship in Germany and here, and so and so, like I said, and if you were to look at my dad, just like if you were to look at me, you wouldn't see German, you wouldn't think Nazi, and I'm definitely like the furthest from that you could be, but like my father, you wouldn't look at him and see that or anything like that. But like I said, I could tell you, growing up, they were all doing the salute over Christmas dinner.
Yeah.
So they don't do it when they're just out at the grocery store or whatever. But it's subtle. It's very much like stuff like when I was a kid, 16 years old, I was in an arranged marriage to a cousin.
So this is where I want to talk again about more current events, namely anti-gay laws and anti-trans laws all over the country under the guise of quote unquote grooming.
Yeah.
The people who groom kids are their fathers and their fathers' buddies.
That's exactly, and like I said, so from at least I was in an arranged marriage to a cousin, like a third cousin, but it was a cousin. Never even met the kid. Okay. The entire time I was living in Germany, never even met the kid, but
at least it was a kid and not a guy in his 20s when you were 16.
Maybe that's what they told me. But well, and I want to be clear, the marriage was supposed to happen when I was 16. This was when I was 12.
Yeah.
So, and it was understood without being explicitly said that it was to keep that bloodline clean.
Of course.
And again, these are people who are right now, they're living in America.
Well, but that's
and they're and they get in here and then they're passing these values on.
Well, and it's not even just Germans. I mean, if you really listen to rich old money Americans talk,
yes,
there is a reason There is a reason. Well, he was kind of new money then, but his kids were old money. But there's a reason that Joseph Kennedy kind of liked Hitler and was willing to spy on the British for Hitler.
Yeah.
Despite supposedly being the U.S. ambassador.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff was just gross.
Yeah.
People like Henry Ford and Prescott, there you go, old money. Prescott Bush had to be talked to by FDR to stop doing business with Hitler after the war had started.
Yeah, and it's like, so, I mean, when you start talking about, when you're talking about things like Nazis in America, the biggest thing I want to stress is, while yes, you have these vocal guys with the tiki torches and whatever marching down the street, that is just the culmination of the grooming that happens by these family members. So people say, why are Americans so divided? Why are Americans so angry? It's because of the grooming that these families, either old money families or families that have come here from elsewhere, are instilling these values in their kids and these young men, and it just is. It's like a perpetual cycle.
And let's look at these attacks on public schooling. There are lots of good angles from which we could attack the teaching of history in American public schools.
Oh, Lord, I could go on about
that.
There
are lots of things that are wrong with it.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not teaching kids serious anti-racism in elementary school or junior high or high school history.
No.
We have only recently started coming close to the truth about things like the Civil War or the Jim Crow era.
And just from I want to and just shout out to all of my Native family and friends out there that I have come to know over the past few years. They've been absolutely wonderful in helping me to learn more about that part of American history. But like one of the things that they didn't tell us, it's like you kind of hear, well, the Native Americans might have had it a little difficult or whatever. If you read Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, if you're not crying, bawling by the end of that, there's something seriously wrong with you as a human being.
Well, no, and that's the whole thing is they had it rough. Genocide, yes, genocide is rough. But this is where Hitler got the ideas.
Yeah.
From the genocide of indigenous Americans, the Jim Crow South.
And you know what?
American prisons, eugenics laws in California and Connecticut and New York.
They do not teach that in our schools. Landed, everybody broke bread, and it was happy for the next 150 years.
Well, they used to teach Reconstruction like Reconstruction was a bad thing, where they should have just handed the South back over to the former Confederates right away.
And you know what? And I say this out loud a lot. I am so glad. So my maternal grandfather on the other side of my family actually helped liberate concentration camps. So I got kind of an interesting dichotomy going on there.
That is
But I say very often, and especially in the wake of the January 6th hearings, which we're talking about now, I say I'm so glad my grandfather is not alive to see this, because all of this ignorance, it's like just been festering and festering and festering. Then you had somebody like Trump come along who gave these people permission to be open about it. It's always been there.
And let's remember the Trumps were German. They pretended to be Dutch because they didn't want to be associated with the Germans during World War II, but they were German. Fred Trump was a Klansman. So we have a German who didn't want to admit to being German during World War II, who had been associated with the Klan before and after World War II.
Well, and to be fair,
makes it kind of sound like Fred Trump Sr. might have been a Nazi.
Well, and I was just about to say, and to be fair, when I found out, I didn't want anything to do with it either. Nope. fuck all the way off and then continue fucking off in that direction.
Yeah,
I want nothing to do with it. So, but thankfully, like I said, since then I found other parts of my identity. My mother was adopted. So I found out she's maternal adoptive parents, my grandfather being World War II veteran. So, that's been a healing process. It really has. Because when you find out that someone in your family is culpable for something like that, it haunts you. It haunts you. So,
I would have nightmares about my family for the rest of my life.
I do.
I believe it.
I do. Yeah, I do. And so, it kind of touches back on something that we talked about earlier, and that's that really instantly made me decide. It's like, you know what? I'm not gonna just stand there and not say anything and let this happen again.
I have enough issues about my father having basically been a Goldwater Republican. I'm glad I don't have to deal with the whole dyed-in-the-wool Nazi thing.
Yeah, it's been intense, and I was kind of talking about it a few years ago, like I'm discussing it now, and the impact that it's had on my life. And unfortunately, some people on the internet got a hold of that, and they were only looking at it from the angle, well, her family was Nazis and she's proud of it because she's talking about it. And I got doxxed and I got swatted. So even just being open about it, the way that I am and the way that it impacts me has had that direct effect on my life. So, and that's the other thing that I think people need to understand, not just about Nazis, but white supremacy in America in general. And when we talk about things like grooming and indoctrinating kids into hatred, is now you look at, okay, so this was my great grandfather that did all of this stuff. I am now having nightmares. Yeah. I am now coping with the social repercussions of that decision.
Yeah.
This is not something that exists in a void, that
exactly
exists in a vacuum. Especially if you're a parent, what you do now and the decisions that you make and the values that you choose to teach to your children are going to have a direct impact on your children, their children, and their great-grandchildren, so on and so forth. And
it matters. It really matters.
Yep. And that's where indoctrinating these kids into this hatred and stuff is
and this is where we get back to schools and the attack on schools. So they're worried that there's that really mild stuff in schools is going to teach their kids not to be racist. It's going to teach their kids to be anti-racist and not to listen to them telling their kids to be racist.
Well, that's really
so they have to do something about that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really what it's about.
And then they're told, the same people are then told, well, the teachers are grooming your kids to be gay and trans. And so now you've got this on top of that.
Yeah.
And so you've got them. So first it's, well, the school might teach my kids not to hate black people. And then it's, well, the school might teach my kids not to hate gay people and trans people. Dang it, can't I teach my kids to hate anyone anymore? And that's really what we're seeing, these angry parents who want to pass down these traditions of bigotry.
Yeah. Yeah. And it really does require, and I really think that for some of them, it is deep-seated bigotry and hatred. I think for others, there is definitely a component of laziness to it. Because it does take a very, 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 and like I said, I had to take a mental health break. I'm exhausted. It takes a very, 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 very concentrated effort to say, I was taught this harmful pattern. I'm going to stop, break that cycle, and move forward.
I'm reasonably happy. My mother's side of the family was Pennsylvania Dutch pacifists. So there's not a whole lot to be too ashamed of there.
Mm-hmm.
And on my father's side of the family, a great uncle was a colonel in the Wisconsin cavalry and died fighting the Confederacy at like 20 or 21 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a little bit to sort of be proud of.
Absolutely.
It's really frustrating to see so much backsliding.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know what? And that kind of touches on when I said my grandfather helped liberate concentration camps. Actually, Dachau was the one that he helped liberate. And years and years and years and years, he didn't talk about it. But I can tell you the one thing that he was a very outspoken progressive. And my grandfather also, he had 7 brothers and 8 sisters from a house with a dirt floor in Pennsylvania. So the other thing that my grandfather was very on his rock about was education and going to school and expanding your mind. So and you know, I mean, the babysitter that he got for me that I had for years was a big burly black man, and they were best friends. You know, Louisiana Cajun black musician. It was great. It was the best thing ever. But my grandfather came from that kind of coal miner and farmer background, and then he went into the army, came back after Korea, and then they retrained him as a radar technician. And he was so enthusiastic as well. If I can come from a hut with a dirt floor in Pennsylvania, and you know, by the time he passed away, he owned 3 different properties. One of them was our ranch that unfortunately we just lost in a nasty divorce. But he had 3 separate properties. You know, so to my grandpa, there really was an American dream. And so that's why I say, just when stuff like this is happening, it makes me really glad that he's not alive to see it, because of the backsliding that we've been doing.
Yeah, it's true. And people were saying when Trump was elected to them, well, how did the racism get this bad? And now under Biden, it seems like people are saying, well, racism isn't that bad.
I really think, and I kind of touched on this earlier about Trump giving people permission to just say it, because Trump said it. Trump being so outlandish. Yeah, it's so outlandish and it's so crazy. He could say anything. Well, everyone else was like, well,
it's true.
If he could say that all Mexicans, why can't I and still be president? Why can't I say whatever I want? And then when Biden came on scene, it's almost like, I won't say they just had permission to crawl back into the hole, but and especially because Trump still has not faced any repercussions for the damage that he did. But I think that permission, they took that and just kept running with it.
People think everything's fine now because Biden's president. They don't understand that kids are still in cages and people are still dying of COVID.
And now we got monkeypox, so that's awesome.
Yeah. Hey, that's just special.
Oh my God. But and I have some not nice things to say about Biden too.
I do too. But I mean, and at the very least, you know, I expected Biden to save the post office and be better than Trump on COVID. And he failed. He's failed at both those things so far.
Miserably. Miserably. I won't even say he failed. He failed miserably. And really, and this comes down to another conversation that we've had, and that's right at this point with Trump having been the last president that we had. Yep. We needed a president who could take us back to honesty and dignity. We needed an unprecedented president for an unprecedented time in our history. And Biden was not it.
Joe Biden is just another time-serving Democrat who had his turn to run. And that's the most depressing thing about it. Yeah. Is that Biden only became president because Trump was so terribly bad in his COVID response.
Yeah.
And what did Biden do? He continued Trump's COVID policy pretty much unaltered.
I didn't think. Oh, he didn't even do that. He was worse because at least and I always thought that I would just spontaneously combust if I ever like said this out loud. But at least Trump said, "Well, here, have a little bit of money. Maybe we should maybe think about getting some vaccines out there or something."
Yeah, no. And
Biden's just been like,
well, Biden's been like, well, we just need to keep getting the vaccines out and everything will be fine. And then it's, well, we're vaccinated, so everything will be fine. Well, it's just unvaccinated people now. Everything's going to be fine.
Well, and the problem is it's like no, President Biden, it's not fine. It's not fine because not only do you have so many unvaccinated people still out there.
Yeah.
My in-laws have gotten COVID twice and they refuse to get vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
So not only do you have still so many unvaccinated people, out there, but you also have this. And people are like, well, the government doesn't control my body. Blah, blah, blah. And you know what? If you had asked me, and especially this is where my insight as the EMS provider comes in. If you had asked me what the COVID response should have been, it should have been exactly like what we did with polio. Mm-hmm. And that's, you go door to door, you jab everybody. I don't care what you're, unless you have a specific, like, real medical exemption, like you're immunocompromised or whatever.
Mm-hmm. And even then,
even then,
I know from talking to immunocompromised friends that you have to be really seriously immunocompromised for your doctor to tell you not to take the vaccine.
Cancer is basically
it.
Cancer.
And if you've got cancer, you might not be worried about COVID so much anyway.
Well, and here's the thing, because of the damage that happened with the fire department to my heart, that was the first thing my doctor said. He was like, "You ready to get the vaccine yet?" And I was like, "Boy, howdy, sir. You tell me where you want me and you jab it right here." But so that's, like I said, we would have had a response similar to polio if I had my, we'll tape outside of your house with that yellow fucking bright caution tape that says, "Don't go here, biohazard." And you can live with that and you can explain it to your neighbors when all your neighbors are texting me being like, "Bro." So and that's how and especially that's the one thing that I am religious about is the vaccines.
But at the same time, and I'm certainly not going to deny the fact that if you get a breakthrough case, you are much less likely to get seriously ill, much less likely to be hospitalized, and much less likely to die if you are vaccinated. That said, breakthrough cases happen.
Yes.
The deeper you go into a pandemic and the higher the vaccinated population is, the more of your cases become breakthrough cases just because most of the people who can still catch the virus are vaccinated now.
Yeah. Well,
and that goes on for a little while. And that's why it's hard to just vaccinate yourself out of a pandemic. Which is why they shouldn't have ended all the other protection.
Well, and that was going to be my next point. And the other thing, and my friend Hypatia and I were talking about this not too terribly long ago, is if people treat like it was Ebola, we would be in a completely different situation. And let me just say, I got story time. So when the Ebola crisis was happening, I want to say in 2014.
Yeah.
I was still running calls, less than usual, but I was still running calls. And I got a call, and we were all EMS providers. We were very aware that this thing was now in or around the United States. Very aware. And I got a call for a young girl. She was a Black girl, and her family had just come over here from Liberia. And so she presented with a febrile seizure. Okay, she was bleeding from her nose. So we transported her to the hospital. And just normal standard precautions, gloves, just the standard stuff that EMTs use. Because at that point we'd all been vaccinated against meningitis and chicken pox and Hep B and all that. You get that whole shebang when you're in EMT.
Sure.
So we weren't too terribly concerned about that, although I do remember at the time I kind of scratched my head and I was like, man, that's a really high fever. She's bleeding from her nose. I was like, oh, I'm slightly concerned. We all figured that if it was really bad, that the hospital or whoever would communicate to us, wait, no, you're in quarantine or whatever. They didn't do that. We all went home that night. I mean, I showered at the station that night, but we all went home later.
So I
get a phone call 2 weeks. Okay. 2 weeks. I get a phone call from the medical director of my county, and he says her and her entire family have been suspected. It turns out they didn't, but have been suspected of having Ebola. In the meantime, in that 2 weeks, I've hugged my kid. I've shared drinks from her sippy cup, just playing around, whatever, like parents do. I've gone back and I've treated other patients.
Yeah, and that's like, I'm just thinking about that. So all those paramedics exposed to Ebola is like a super spreader event waiting to happen, and it's just a total stroke of luck that it wasn't.
And you know what? And that's why and boy, I remember when I got that phone call. You want to talk about your fucking blood turning to ice water.
Yeah.
Ice water. And so I tell people, and I kept saying that throughout the whole pandemic. Anytime somebody was like, oh, I don't want to get vaccinated.
And now let's remember.
I'd be like, look, in your ears and your asshole. Okay. If that's what COVID was doing, you would be singing a whole different tune right now. But because you have this perception that, oh, it's just a respiratory thing, which it's not. It's
just like a cold.
Oh, it's just a cold. Okay, no, it's neurological. It just presents as a respiratory disorder.
Yeah.
So if you had visible hemorrhaging, you would be singing a whole different tune. And that's what frustrates me so much about the COVID response.
Yeah.
Is that if it had been done properly, the healthcare system here in America, and we'll have to talk about this whole another day, but the healthcare here in America, the system is so dysfunctional. It took 2 weeks for a hospital to notify the attending paramedics that they were dealing with a suspected case of Ebola, while we're out there with our families, with our friends, doing our jobs,
and now
lives.
And now, everybody, I want you to picture how much more contagious COVID is than Ebola, and consider that there are now paramedics working as we speak.
Yes.
And they could be exposed to a COVID patient and not know it, because that COVID patient doesn't know it, because nobody's testing seriously anymore.
Nobody's testing. So the hospital, let's say even if that patient did have COVID, they knew it. Paramedics are masked. Everything goes perfect. Well, okay, they get to the hospital. They die 2 days later because they have COVID. No one's going to let that paramedic know.
Yeah.
No one is going to, because no one's tracking anymore either. So no one's going to. So let's say then that paramedic gets COVID, gives it to their family, and their family turns around and gives it to 90-year-old grandma.
And schools are open. So kid goes to school and gives it to other kids, and those kids go home and give it to their families. And maybe the kids are fine, and maybe they get long COVID. Yep. Who knows? But now their parents get sick, and their grandparents are dead.
And their parents 10 years down the line can't work because they can't breathe.
Exactly.
Because their lungs were irreparably damaged. So COVID right now, COVID as a respiratory illness is bad enough.
Yes.
But what we are facing now, what we're going to be facing 5, 10, 20 years down the line, is an unprecedented wave of people who have lung damage and neurological damage
from
disease that initially presented as heart damage. It initially presented disease.
Yeah.
And then you start talking about, because I know people love to talk about the economy. So let's frame this in that perspective. So now you have bare minimum, okay? half of America's workforce, okay, is going to be facing these debilitating side effects down the line.
Well, now remember, the Spanish flu was in 1919. Now, what happened in Germany in 1923? The Nazi Party was founded. It had a different name then, but in 1923 is when the Nazi Party was founded. By 1926, they were calling themselves the Nazi Party, and they were putting up posters showing people who had been damaged for life by the Spanish flu and saying the government can't afford to take care of these cripples anymore.
Yep. And then they threw them all into concentration camps.
Yeah. And this is just after the Spanish flu. Just a few years.
Yeah, and the other thing too that that I want to stress that I have seen, at least personally with COVID, and I'm sure just from our mutual conversation you'll agree with me, is COVID, to me, the reason why it hasn't been taken as seriously as it should have been is because it's being used as eugenics.
Yes.
I really think, because if you look at the ratio of people who are getting it, you're looking at minorities,
poor people,
and poor people.
Essential workers. And who are essential workers? Essential workers are all poorer people who are more job insecure and food insecure and home insecure, sometimes who are working a couple of jobs.
Yep.
And a disproportionate number of those people, for their share of the population, are black or brown.
And if you really want to know, I think the most heartbreaking aspect of that, if you look at it from the eugenics angle, is that a lot of those essential workers and a lot of people caught in that crossfire, they are essential. That's the whole point of that.
Yeah.
But how many of our healthcare workers and first responders who were considered expendable in this whole thing?
No, and that's exactly true.
So,
and this is a very good point, because it is war on the poor. That's exactly what it is.
Thank you, Jared.
And that's important to remember, is that we are the targets of a class war.
Yes.
Us specifically as working class people, and black people and gay people and trans people even more so.
Yeah. It is a war, at least to me, wealthy white man.
And we're seeing wealthy white people get richer. I mean, Elon Musk went from being a minor league billionaire to richest man in the world during all this COVID mess, while the market was doing all this weird stuff.
And it's exactly that. And the other thing too is, okay, so if you're a rich white man, okay, you're going to be able to go to the hospital and get an infusion of whatever antibodies you need or whatever, you know.
Let's look at Trump.
Yeah.
They took care of Trump, and look how fast he was back up and around again.
Oh my God. But then you have Todd Todson, who works at McDonald's and makes $8 an hour or whatever. He gets sick. He can't miss a day at work, so he gives it to all his coworkers. Half of them die. Half of them have some debilitating illness down the line. But they weren't able to go to the hospital or even urgent care, because now they're not even doing free testing. So you have to go to urgent care to get tested, and if you don't have insurance, it's going to cost you $80 out of pocket.
It's true.
So that is, my friends, that is a war on the poor.
And the people who can't afford not to work are the ones who get sick.
Well, and you know, and this is an opportunity, especially where I'm going to use my voice and say, you know, one of the things that I truly believe that this country needs is a general strike.
Yes.
And it needs to hit hard, and it needs to hit fast, because these wealthy people need to understand that they're going to have a very hard time 5 or 10 years down the line when half of the workforce is suddenly poof, gone. Okay. And then you're talking, and then you're talking about, unprecedented levels of gun violence in our school. Okay, so the next generation is under siege too. There ain't gonna be nobody to save your asses if you're not willing to take care of the people who take care of you.
Exactly. It's
So
true.
that's why we need that general strike. And even if it's only one day, even one day, everybody, all the essential workers, just poof, walk off the job. Well, are they going to fire everybody? But it has to be coordinated, and it has to happen all at once, one day, just like an arrow, man. Just fling it where it has to go.
No, and I think that's great. Everybody has to be able to take that one day to do that one day, but I think that's
and I realize too, like I said, we talked about right now, I'm on FMLA because I'm actually pending surgery, but I was working as a pharmacy tech prior to that. So right now it's just my husband working. So, I understand that for some families that's not feasible or practical. But if you are that one person who thinks that they can spare that one day and everybody walk off, it needs to happen.
I agree. It does.
And because the only thing I can say is that unless there is an unprecedented movement from working class people that really puts it, because the only way you are going to speak to these politicians and these corporations is if you hurt their wallet.
Well, I think it's important to remember that there are two things that we need to do. The first is that we need to make politicians scared of us again.
Absolutely.
But the second is, in order to do that, we have to recognize that right now they are more frightened of Nazis than they are of us. And we have to make them more frightened of us than Nazis. And we have to make the Nazis frightened of us.
Yes. Well, and the reason why they're more afraid of Nazis, y'all, gets back to what I said, because it's their families.
Yes.
If I go against these people, I'm going to get written out of the will, and then I won't be the next billion.
Exactly. And everybody's got these. But even more than that, if you're in politics, then you're in a position where, like it or not, capital has a lot of influence over you.
And I think that's where you start getting into, my friend Jason Call, who's running for office in Washington.
God I really like Jason.
He is such a sweetheart. Oh my goodness. But he's running in Washington. We had this conversation too. And I said, look, Jason, I said, if you get up there, I said, I want you to make me a promise. I said, I want you to promise me. I said, I understand that it's very difficult to divest capitalism from politics in America. And I said, but I want you to get up there, and I want you to remember the working people who put you there, because you spoke to them first.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need, is we need politicians who are going to remember their roots. And I really think that comes down to, unfortunately, as awful as it is, I think that the generations, at least that have come before me, are so heavily indoctrinated into the systems, this capitalist system. I don't think it's going to happen. I think that finding the strength of character to not be bought off is going to be something that we're going to see from our children. Because they are keenly aware that the system is not working; it's failing them.
I think it's not right for us to burden our children with saving us, but I also think that our parents aren't giving us much other choice.
No, and that's the whole reason. And we talked about that. That's the whole reason why I'm here, why I'm talking to you. When you said, "Well, does anybody want to help me tonight?" I said, "Well." I said, I do a lot of local activism, and I have a lot of years of medic experience, so maybe I can bring something new to the table here. But I couldn't imagine putting this on my daughter. I couldn't, and I won't. I at least want to be able to look at her when I'm 80 years old and say, look, I tried to carry some of that burden as long as I could for you.
Yeah, no, and I I'm really trying to do everything I can to try to agitate as much as I can among the folks who are listening. Um, we'll see what happens,
We're looking at you.
but I really think that something has to happen, and even a general strike might not be enough,
Yeah.
and that people have to be thinking about what is necessary and what needs to be done and how to do it.
Well, and my husband and I have had many, because my husband is even more far left than me. He'll tell you he's a straight up communist. But but I think that we've had a lot of discussion on the merits of violence in protesting and activism versus non. And the problem, I will never advocate for hurting anybody. Okay, my
Sure.
heart is too soft for that. I don't personally don't have the stomach or the guts to do it. That said, I think that you've seen hundreds of thousands of people marching for gun regulations. You've seen
Yeah.
hundreds and thousands of people marching for women's reproductive health.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, in 2016, 100,000 women at DC, and they're still talking about overturning Roe v. Wade. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you're looking at that, you're saying, well, we've tried marching, we've tried being peaceful. What the hell else is there to do? And it comes down to that old saying, those who make peaceful revolution impossible
Yeah.
make violent revolution inevitable. And that's why
True.
I keep saying to some of these um, to some of these older generations, even the generations that guys have got to start paying attention to your children and your grandchildren when they say this isn't working, because this whole thing is about to come down on top of you if you don't start valuing your labor force, treating them better, and making this a country that works for everybody, not just a small handful of people.
Well, and that's really the problem, though, is a country that works for everybody would no longer work for that small handful. And that's what they can't really afford to allow happen. I mean, nobody's going to let
Well, that's where
themselves
the
nobody's going to let themselves be voted out of a position that they were never elected to.
Well, and that's very true, and that's where we started talking about these types or these politicians and these wealthy white people like this are embedded like
Yes.
ticks, and as awful as this is going to sound, sometimes you got to just light it on fire, burn it out.
Yeah. No. And that's what has to be done sometimes. I
Well,
think.
you know what? Like I said, we have marched and marched and marched, and we've tried
Yeah.
all of the peaceful stuff, and it's just not working, which it should. You know,
It should.
theoretically, we should live in a country where we can get out and we can march in the streets and we can tell our politicians, you work for us. But then you start getting into that dangerous, well, that's kind of what they were saying in January 6th, too. So it's like, what's the difference between, where do you draw the line
Well,
between?
so here's the thing. If January 6th were a real socialist revolution with the multiracial working class standing up for universal human rights against both corrupt parties,
Yeah.
I would have absolutely supported that. But that's not what it was. And there's no
Well,
pretending that's what it was.
and I really think, and I know maybe this is going to sound a little pompous of me, but I really think people who want a revolution, like a socialist revolution, I really think that there is an aspect of recognizing and understanding things that are sacred to
Yes.
us, whether it be symbols or words or documents, whatever it may be. I don't care if you think it's the Bible or the Constitution or the Talmud or whatever. There's a group of people who understand things that are sacred. And I really think that when you talk about a socialist revolution, you're not talking about people going and smearing shit on the halls of our capital.
Well, I don't think that anyone would necessarily do that. However, I will say, and I believe this is worth mentioning, and I don't believe this is wrong. There are people who pointed this out as just proof that the French Revolution was the worst thing that ever happened. But one of the things they did in the French Revolution was they dug up the fancy, expensive tombs of all the kings, and they threw the kings' carcasses into garbage heaps. There was like one or two kings that escaped this fate because of their really great reputation.
But see, that's what I'm talking about when I say that there are some things to people that we know are sacred. Okay, we're not going to go dig up our buddies that are, buried in paupers' coffins.
That's true. That's true. And that's the sort of thing I mean, too, is that we need to remember that the right people need to be the objects of our attention. The reason they were focused on the king in France is because in France, all power came from the king. And technically speaking, the king owned everything.
Well, so I'm reading actually a fascinating book right now. It's about, this is going to sound weird, but it's about the history of different colors and how different pigments were made. As an artist, that's something that I'm super fascinated with. But it was talking about Marie Antoinette and a specific color that she wore at the time. And it was talking about how Marie Antoinette was so, like, everyone around her was begging her. They said, you need to stop with all these opulent dresses, because these working class people, man, are about to tear you apart. And that is exactly what happened. And at the last moment, they took all of her fancy dresses, tore them all up, and divvied out pieces of this dress to these working class women.
Yeah.
And she wore a plain linen shift until the day that she died. Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about when you're talking about, recognizing sacred things versus recognizing symbols of your oppression.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that I could definitely agree with this. And this is very true about January 6th. If they were not who they were, there would have been a lot more shooting. The cops never would have let socialists inside the Capitol.
Yeah,
all this stuff.
Somebody I just saw a comment. Somebody made a very good point that said if they were all socialists, that if they'd stormed the Capitol, they'd be dead.
Yeah, no,
and that's exactly the truth. And that's another reason why they said that a violent revolution is hard, because these cops right now, I mean, you look at the military or the police budget, military budget. I mean, that too. Well, you look about the police budgets across the country, they are being trained for that.
Well, that's why you look for how to fight asymmetrically.
Yes.
And that's all I'll say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other part of it too is, I'm a big Bernie supporter. And one of the things that he and Killer Mike were saying in the concert was there are more of us than there are them.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really, and I was never in the military, but there's a point in EMS, you call it triage.
Sure.
What can you lose versus what can you save? So is our democracy worth the trouble? If indeed you think America is a democracy.
Well, and that's really the thing, is that it's not a question of is our democracy worth the trouble. It's a question of, do we want to live in a democracy or not? If we want to live in a democracy, we need to make America a democracy for real.
Let me rephrase, is a democracy the trouble?
Exactly.
Yep.
And that's a lot of trouble. There's a lot of trouble to make to create democracy in America.
Democracy, let alone a society that's socialist.
It's true.
And that's the other part, is Americans from day one, because of the Cold War, have been so indoctrinated against, with the Red Scare and everything, indoctrinated against socialism and communism that you just mention those words and it's like the boogeyman.
That's not just America either, because America has exported that culture all over the world in the form of movies and magazines and TV shows.
Oh yeah.
And you can't go to the movies in a lot of countries that even aren't necessarily super pro-American without seeing movies that show the American military as the good guys.
Well, and and that's the other thing too. And my husband and I had a fascinating conversation about that the other day. It's again, it starts with the indoctrination in school. When you have the army and the military coming into schools to do presentations, I don't think that should be allowed either.
Well, I mean, they actually send recruiters to high schools now.
Yep.
They used to have to wait till kids were in college, but now they can send recruiters right to high schools.
I took the FAFSA when I was a freshman in high, or not the FAFSA, the oh shit, what do they call that? The Navy test. Oh my god, I'm just drawing a complete blank. Anyway, but I took that my freshman year of high school. That's it.
Yeah.
Yes. I had to take that when I was in high school. Yeah. And actually they they tried to woo me. They said they wanted me to work on nuclear submarines. And I said, are you out your damn mind? I don't think so. Nope. Nope. Not doing it. And that's another thing. I kind of chuckle, but I was talking the other day. One of the things that I do on my free time is chat with the Skinwalker Ranch team, because I'm super into that. But I was talking with them, and one of the guys made a comment, and he said, wow, you seem to know a lot about this kind of stuff. And I said, well, I almost went to school for, the hard sciences. And unfortunately, I just couldn't afford to do it. So that's why I became an EMT.
Makes sense.
But yeah, I probably could have done something like that if I wanted to. But when they told me that, I was like,
Yeah. I couldn't afford to go to school to do any of the things that I had thought about doing either.
Nope. And I didn't want to put myself and potentially my children in debt.
Well, I would have ended up, if I had done the sorts of things that I wanted to do, I would have ended up in academia, and I would either be cranky and disgruntled and underpaid, the same as I am now, or I would be some tenured asshole somewhere who was just another white guy in academia, and I wouldn't want that either.
And I mean, I just, that's especially my poor grandfather, God rest his soul. I think he would have loved to have seen me actually go to college for that. But like I said, I didn't want to market and mortgage my future that way, or my child's future for that matter. Sure. So I just never did it. But, I mean, I am very lucky. So she's 12 years old. She wants to work on Mars landers. And she's one of the many people who has her name on the InSight lander. So I'm a very proud parent for that. But, and that's kind of, it gets back to, me personally, I'm trying so hard to make some kind of change happen for my daughter. But unfortunately, I think that some of the issues that we have are so ingrained in our society and our country that, it's going to take a lot, our generation, and then all the way down the line.
Well, and I think
and it can't be incremental. And we talked about this earlier. Incremental is not working.
Well, we need to be able to, at the very least, we need to be able to force major concessions.
Yeah.
At the very most, we need to be able to overthrow the state. And, all of that takes power.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that power has to be built somehow, whether it's through strikes in the labor movement, whether it's protests. It's like Gira said before, you want to hit them with everything.
Yes.
There are also probably some things that are not on that list that we should be doing.
Yeah.
And all of that matters.
Nothing would get us the little black bags over our head and a knock on the door at night.
Well, I mean, at some point that's going to be a serious risk anyway.
Yes. Oh, I already know activists who've gotten
yes.
it. So
yes. And not even just, people on the front lines. I mean, it's been said a couple times on both this current version of my show and one of the previous versions of my show, by Sherry Hankala, who was Jill Stein's running mate in 2012.
Which is fascinating. That's
And
amazing.
who is now one of the founders and spokespeople for the Poor People's Army. She and Jill Stein were held incommunicado for trying to get into the debates in 2012.
Ooh. See, that's new. I didn't know that.
Yeah. And when I heard that, it was like, yeah, I knew that they were serious about keeping third parties out of the debates, but that's a big deal.
Ooh, Lord have mercy. And you know what? Because when Bernie said he was going to run again, I was one of his delegates in the last election, all the way up to the nationals. And, he said, oh, I might run again. And I said, for the love of God, if you're going to get the kind of numbers that you did last time, please run as an independent, because they are not going to let you get anywhere on the Dem ticket.
So once they realized he had won Nevada by such a big amount, they were scared. Because
they were terrified. And you know what? Just let me tell you what I saw here in my precinct. So, we went to, I caucused. I was here in the caucus. That's where I was elected as one of the delegates. And I'm here to tell you that there were three in the final round. There were 3 people left standing. Okay, out of 170 people in my precinct, Bernie had half of them. The other 2 were Elizabeth Warren and Pete Buttigieg. Biden didn't even make it.
I know.
And I hear from other precincts it was the exact same way there.
Biden was like 4th, 5th place in Iowa at best.
Yep. And I just remember whenever the DNC announced they were making Biden as their candidate, I wasn't shocked, but I screamed at the TV. I was like, really? Really? Are you serious? He didn't even make it here.
Well, it was Obama pulling the strings.
Yeah.
And Clyburn sewing up the South.
Well, and I just remember that made me so damn angry, because I was like, what did I do this for? I mean, I was at all of Bernie's marches, and I have pictures of myself with him, and we did, phone calls, banking, everything you can imagine. I was there the whole way, and then I got all the way to the nationals, even as his delegate. By then, he wasn't running anymore. He'd endorsed Biden, but we still went to represent his agenda. But I got all the way up there, and I just remember I was so damn angry, because I was like, we did all of this work. You guys knew our numbers were there, and at the end, when we were about to cross the finish line, you guys kicked us in the balls.
Yeah, and it was really...
And that really... up until that point, I thought, maybe this can work. Maybe my generation and the other generations that are getting involved here, the not me, us thing, we can really make a difference. We can really make things better here. And I really and truly believe that all the way up until that point. And then I was like, all of these, jackasses out here going, well, why don't these young people just vote and and go through legitimate channels? Well, we did that. Yeah. And it didn't work.
And not only did it, quote unquote, not work, but they actually did everything they could to stop us.
They sabotaged the ever-living hell out of us. It's like giving somebody chamomile tea when they need coffee.
Exactly. And they're so gleeful about it. And they're so proud of themselves.
Yeah, and that really disillusions me. It's like, do you guys, I mean, and they have no idea what they started there, really, because I really do think that with so many people that were invested in that not me, us movement, I really think that, making it as far as they did and then seeing the rug pulled out from underneath them,
Well, I would like to think that a lot of folks like us have become more radicalized and are pushing more in that direction.
I definitely did.
There are people though who have gone the other way. They've gone in some Jimmy Dore or Movement for a People's Party direction where you can't even be sure what they believe in anymore.
Well, and I think too, to people who go that way, I don't particularly care what end of the spectrum of that spectrum you're on. To people who lean that way, it's like, I think I would say to them, it's like, look, the celebrities and businessmen, they are these people, entertainers, businessmen, lawyers. These are not people who are there to help you. These are not people who are going to make your situation better. I don't care what promises they're giving you. If they are in any kind of situation or profession that is ego centered, so business, law, like corporate law,
No,
anything like that, I
no
think
lawyer, no lawyer who's the right kind of lawyer to run for office is really going to run for
that's
office.
exactly it. None of these people who have that kind of ego are going to help you.
If
They
a
are going to
doctor, well, the best example in politics are some of the doctors.
yeah.
If these people were good doctors, they would not be career politicians.
That's exactly it. If they were good doctors, and I'm here to tell you, as a pharmacy technician and an emergency medical technician, I would love absolutely no Oz and his jingle jangles. He pisses me off so much. But but no, in all seriousness, and that's exactly what. Now, when you start, if you have a climate scientist that says I'm going to run for president, the first thing I'm gonna go on saving the earth, and I'm gonna go, okay.
Well, there was a climate scientist running for Senate in Colorado for a while, but she was a disappointing Elizabeth Warren type.
And that's unfortunate. It really, and and that, I guess that you can't really, it's tough to paint them all with a broad stroke.
She
But
thought that was really radical, I guess. I hope she's more radical now than she was then. I don't know, though.
I don't know. I mean, I would hope so.
I
Um,
would hope so, too.
I would like to see Deb Haaland
Mm-mm-mm.
as president.
I don't know.
I love her.
I think she's I think she's one of a lot of people who have compromised too much with the Biden wing and have
And
really let go of a lot of their basic
maybe
principles.
because I saw something the other day. They were talking about we're starting the Indian youth movement, and why not call it Native Peoples movement? What do you mean Indian? And a lot of them got really honked off about that. So I don't know. You might be right.
It's hard to be sure, but it's very concerning to see some of the decisions that people make.
Yeah.
Um, there isn't any cohesion as a voting bloc in the progressive caucus.
No, and that's part of
And
the
if the
problem.
progressive caucus can't vote as a bloc, what good is it to have a progressive caucus?
Well, and it's really not. And as cliche as it sounds, I think a huge part of the problem is you have to look at people who are going to do the progressive work without hair splitting about that time they smoked a joint when they were 12.
Well, that's really the problem, though, is that there are too many people who want to call themselves progressive because it doesn't really mean anything. Because all these people in Congress have been able to call themselves progressive for years,
Yeah.
without actually doing anything.
Yeah. Well, and so so then I guess my question for that would be, what would the solution be in terms of if you're calling yourself progressive, but it's a do nothing title right now, or at least it seems that way.
Well,
I would say there has to be a way to reclaim that, but there's unless we're all willing to work together, I don't think it's going to happen.
You have to have an attitude where you're actually going to be in opposition to all the capitalists.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are capitalist parties.
Yeah.
Their donors are either big or little capitalists.
Yeah.
They range from mega millionaires down to the local gentry.
Yep.
These are people who matter, who have a lot of power, and whose power comes from owning property.
Well, and we have a perfect in Des Moines, and I think if there's a video of this later, I'll share it with some of my followers, because so there's a gentleman here in Des Moines, and his name is Joe Gatto. And everyone here in the city of Des Moines, everyone on my feed, you say Joe Gatto, and they're going to be like, oh, God, that guy. So this is a guy, he owns 3 different restaurants. Okay, he sits on the Des Moines City Council.
Of course he does.
And he owns 3 different restaurants, but he doesn't even live in Des Moines. He uses his mother's address. Yes. And greatly, obviously, great businesses. And, you know, I mean, if you want to run for a city council for your business interest or whatever, I get it. Okay, I don't agree with it, but I get it. I get why you're doing it. That said, that's where we talk about even these little teeny itty bitty elections matter.
Yes.
And you have to, if you're going to call yourself a progressive, if you want real change that's not just like,
well, the local elections matter more than any of the others.
Local elections make a huge difference. And, you know,
school board, judges.
This last election, we had a progressive running. Her name was Indira here in Des Moines. She's the only progressive that ran. And boy, I tell you what, every single time she put something in front of the city council, it's like hitting a wall, man. They block her every chance they get. But she ran and she won.
Yeah.
And I think that if more people can get it out, and I've had people ask me, well, you know, how come you haven't run? And I say, well, I don't like people looking at my life with a magnifying glass.
Well, and then that's really the whole thing is, you know, if you ran, somebody would dig this tape up and say, oh, look, her family are Nazis. We can't trust her.
Exactly. Exactly. Somebody will say it. And you know what? And it's like, I deal with too much crap. Okay. Like I said, I don't need any of that crap. Okay. I can't handle it. But I'm here to tell people, just everyone in general, those little elections, if you want to make a difference, get on your city council, get on your city's human rights commission. It makes a huge
board.
Difference. Run
board, for your local school board. That's where you can fight the Nazis more than anywhere else.
Board. And you know what? And something else, I'm so glad you brought that up, because we have one of the senators from here. Oh God, I hope I don't shoot myself in the foot with this, but one of the senators here, his name is Jake Chapman. And he's one of the big, ban the books, no critical race theory and none of that.
Of course.
Blah, blah, blah. Well, so the funny thing about him is he ran the private ambulance company that I used to work for.
That's hilarious.
And I have all the tea on that fool. And I'm here to tell you, there is a reason why business owners like that run for those positions. Because maybe they're trying to get out of the time that the board was looking at when they overbilled Medicare for services.
Yeah, we had a candidate for governor who was a doctor who had done a lot of Medicare overbilling. That came out when he ran for governor here.
Or maybe you're trying to obfuscate when you didn't upgrade your equipment on the ambulance and some patient suffered for it.
Exactly.
So if you're going to make a difference, that's why those people are running. They're running because they know that they're going to get in deep shit if they don't cover their crap up.
Exactly.
So you have got to run school boards, city councils, human rights commissions. You have got to run. And I really think that's where a huge difference is going
We
to come
need
from.
lawyers who don't suck to run for judgeships, because state judges are usually elected or appointed from city and county judges who are all elected and sometimes get reelected without opposition.
Well, and something else too is I just want to say, having judges in those positions, if you're judges, having lawyers in those positions, progressive lawyers, would be so helpful and so wonderful to the 16-year-old kid who got docked with 2 felonies for stepping in front of a police car off the curb.
No, and that makes sense. And I'm going to bring this up. This is a good place for some last thoughts before we wrap up. The Green Party should try to build from the ground up more. Local elections are important for small parties and independents. So first, yes, Gira, you are exactly right.
So I'm registered Green Party. So just so we're clear, and
the Green Party should try to build from the ground up more. They elected a mayor in Baldwin Park, California in 2020. That was actually pretty cool and a big deal.
He did. Yeah.
But, and this is something that people don't know enough about. There are requirements for running candidates for president and getting a certain percentage of votes in order to keep your ballot line.
Yep.
In 2020, the Green Party lost their New York State ballot line because a bunch of people voted for Biden on the Working Families Party line instead of voting for Jill Stein on Howie Hawkins on the Green Party line.
Yeah.
And so the Green Party isn't on the ballot in New York State anymore.
And you know what? And I will confess too, I got played a little bit, I really feel. So I was registered Green Party for years and years and years.
Sure.
And then 2016 happened, and I saw Trump. And I remember when he announced he was going to run, I looked at my husband. I said, "Oh, shit, here we go. He's going to win."
Yeah.
And fucked. And my sorry. And my husband said, no one's going to vote for him. Are you crazy? I said, no, they will too. Just you watch. For all of the reasons.
Yeah, I didn't think it was possible for him to win, but it was like it just exploded out of nowhere, and then it was impossible to stop.
And so I said to myself, I said, Jesus Christ, we've got to stop this guy. This guy's nuts. So I switched. From Green to Democrat so that I could vote for Hillary. And because I initially was with Bernie, and Bernie said drop out and join Hillary. So I did. And same thing. I kept it so I could roll for Bernie again. And then when he suggested, and you know what? After Biden won, I was waiting. I waited and I watched, and I said, what's he going to do with COVID? And when he completely borked that, I said, you know what? That's it. I'm done.
Yeah. Somebody who was fairly diehard. Somebody who was fairly diehard, we have to stop Trump, was tweeting on their Twitter account today. I'm tired of Biden. I can't believe these Democrats had us fooled for 10 years that they cared more than Republicans. And this was somebody who, just we kind of have to vote for Democrats to stop Trump. We don't have any other choice. But Biden hasn't been materially better than Trump for anyone.
I would say arguably, maybe in terms of his personage and the way that he speaks, he's better. He doesn't come off like a total narcissistic maniac.
Well, but have you listened to Biden sometimes? Because sometimes he does.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so I was one of those people I was Green Party. And then I said, boy, this guy's dangerous. This is bad. But Biden has been so terrible, so abysmal to me.
So I'll be totally honest. I think this Ukraine thing would have happened under Hillary if Trump hadn't won. I'm not saying that I think Trump was good in any way. He wasn't, but he was trying to strain against his administration's policy regarding Russia. And I'm not a Putin fan. I don't like Putin. I don't think Russia has good intentions necessarily. But there's no reason for the United States to be whipping up some new Cold War against Russia in order to start proxy wars via Ukraine and get public approval for helping Nazis attack innocent people in Luhansk and Luhansk.
Yeah, yeah, and I agree. And you know, I on the subject of when it comes to talking about the United States being involved in Ukraine, at least at the end of the day, for me, what it really boils down to, I get the principle. It's like you don't want someone next door to you coming into your house and pissing all over your house plant.
Exactly.
I get it. At the same time, damn, I went to the grocery store the other day, okay, and a 1 pound bag of flour used to cost me $1.69. It was $5.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy crap, if the United States is not going to be able to sustain this if it can't provide a living wage for its people when these prices are so high. So how are we going to be over in somebody else's country fighting this war when we can't even get flour for a reasonable price because people are making $7 an hour?
They can always make sure to afford money for war. They can afford billions and billions of dollars for war. Look how much money disappeared into Afghanistan.
Yeah. Ooh, that was like a black hole too.
And Ukraine's going to be the same sort of thing. Money is going to disappear into it.
Yep.
We're going to have Nazis for years, the same way we had Al Qaeda for years.
Yeah.
It's going to have long-term consequences that are genuinely bad that nobody's even thinking about right now.
Yeah.
And they should be.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
And on that note, I think I have to ask you, do you have any final thoughts before I sign us off?
Well, I just wanted to say I'm so privileged to have been here and talking with you today. It was wonderful. We had some great conversations. I would hope that we could have some more in the future.
Definitely.
So, and the other thing I'll say too is, like I said, I have a really big heart, so I love everyone out there. And so the important thing I want to stress is just everybody, please take care of each other. We need mutual aid. We need kindness. We need compassion now, probably more than we ever did.
Yes, we do.
So that's what I think I would leave us with.
And I think that's a good place for us to stop. From me, from Alex, who couldn't be here tonight, and from 7 Colorful Birds, everybody have a great night.
Good night. Take care of yourselves.